Japan is very worried about China's threats to invade Taiwan. That's because if Taiwan falls, the Japanese islands could be next. That's why Japan's Deputy Prime Minister recently said Japan must defend Taiwan if China invades. Another top Japanese defense official recently said the world needs to protect Taiwan. And Japan's defense white paper mentioned Taiwan's stability for the first time ever. And it turns out, Japan has been preparing for a Chinese invasion for years. In 2017, Japan began building missile defense systems on its southern islands. This is a strategic area for the defense of both Japan and Taiwan. The Ryukyu Islands, which include Okinawa, Miyakojin, and Ishigaki, are to the sides of the Miyako Strait. It's an important seaway the Chinese military could potentially use to enter the Pacific. They're also near the Senkaku Islands, Japanese-administered islands that China also claims. But the southernmost island, Yonaguni, is just under 70 miles away from Taiwan. You can actually see Taiwan from it. Missile bases on these islands would be critical to the defense of Taiwan if Chinese forces tried to surround Taiwan on multiple fronts. They could also provide a staging ground for U.S. forces. So Japan has big plans for these islands. Japan has been putting missile bases on its southernmost islands for years now, but things are beginning to ramp up. In August, Japan's defense minister said, Tokyo plans to deploy medium-range ground-to-air guided ammunition units, ground-to-ship guided ammunition units, and 500 to 600 troops on Ishigaki by the end of March 2023. The Japanese military also plans to put an electronic warfare unit on the island of Yonaguni. That's the island you can see Taiwan from. Japan's defense ministry is also seeking a record budget, $52 billion, to get stealth jets and the long-range missiles these southern islands need. This marks a 10th consecutive annual increase in the defense budget, and the largest percentage growth since fiscal 2014. But for context, $52 billion is still far less than the more than $200 billion China spends on its military. Still, Japan is seeking to gain an edge through what Japan calls game changers. These include potentially electromagnetic weapons that can target drones and other aerial threats, as well as satellites and radar systems. The idea of Japan defending Taiwan terrifies the Chinese Communist Party. After all, the Chinese military is almost completely untested in battle. So the Communist Party is using its favorite tactic. It's trying to convince Japan that a fight with China would be so bloody, there's just no point in having a fight in the first place. Recently, this video was circulating in China, threatening Japan with nuclear annihilation.
我们在解放台湾时，如果日本胆敢武力干预，哪怕出动一兵一卒、一机一舰作战力量，我们不是对等还击，而是对日本全面开战，首战用核弹，连续用核弹，直到日本第二次宣布无条件投降。
Hu Xijin, the editor-in-chief of my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, said China will destroy Japanese forces in a Taiwan conflict. What's he basing that on? No clue. Here's basically the entire U.S. Air Force in the Western Pacific was concentrated on just 2 bases. Fighter jets at the Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, Japan, and bombers and big support planes at Guam's Andersen Air Force Base. Essentially, all of its eggs were in 2 baskets. China knew this. That's why, after years of buildup, the Chinese rocket force possesses around 1,300 ground-launched missiles with sufficient range to hit Kadena and Andersen from mainland China. So the U.S. is now fanning out. Warplanes and personnel are being redistributed to other bases in the region. That definitely would make it harder for the PLA rocket force to wipe out U.S. forces in a quick strike. Of course, again, China's rocket force is untested. How capable they would actually be can only truly be seen in a conflict. China is putting a lot into developing what it calls aircraft carrier killer missiles. It's almost like they're telling us they want to fight the U.S. But remember, the US also has many allies in the region. Besides Japan, Taiwan, Australia, and maybe New Zealand, if an actual conflict occurred, all of China's neighbors would know this is it. We either support the US side, or we're all under Beijing's thumb forever. The Chinese regime understands that a conflict would not go in its favor, which is why I mentioned earlier that their favorite tactic is to try to convince other countries to give up without fighting. Much easier that way.
Hi guys, Lou here from Wolfman Chronicles channel. I want to welcome you guys. Thank you for supporting this channel on this platform. First and foremost, I want to thank you for the 100 subscribers. And also a big thank you to BitChute for allowing us to share this kind of information freely on this platform. Folks, as you guys have just heard from Chris Chappell, China Uncensored, a very good report that is done there for us, how many countries, including New Zealand, are all getting together and getting ready for maybe World War III with China. Wow, folks, this is crazy. But yeah, last night when I was working, I was listening a bit to our New Zealand radio station, and people are calling in and people are afraid and scared, and you know, so I thought I'd do a little video on just doing a bit of a combination, showing you what is going on, and then also if there is a war that might break out, then it kind of give you a sort of a comparison of the China force and the US force. Okay, I'm not even putting in you know, the UK and Australia and also Germany that's joining up there, and also New Zealand and also Japan and some surrounding allies. Okay, but folks, what I do know is that US have about the most powerful military out there to crush China on land, sea, and air if they do try something stupid like that. Okay, and that's just the US alone. Also, I know that the US have over 6,000 nuclear missiles at their disposal, and I hope it doesn't come to that. And China's got about 350 nuclear missiles at their disposal. So the only way, folks, the only way I see for China to win World War III is like a kamikaze war, okay, like what the Japanese used to do in the wars with their planes, just going, you know, suicidal into the ships. Well, that is the only way for China to win this war is if they go kamikaze, which means firing all 350 missiles at once at several different countries. Okay, but that will basically wipe out the whole world, including China. But it's not going to go there, because I'm going according to the scriptures from the Bible here. And if we look at the Revelation 9, okay, and I'll read for you from Revelation 9 verse 13. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel that had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river of Euphrates. Okay, and then verse 15, and the 4 angels were loosened, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year. So we have a time frame there, okay, a specific time frame, for to slay a third part of man. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200 200,000. And I heard the number of them. So folks, in Revelation 9, it actually does talk about a great war that will break out. Okay? Not a matter of if, but a war that will break out. And there is a specific time given for that. Now, we don't know when that time is, but we do have an idea when this war will happen. And it says clearly, it talks about the great river of Euphrates, folks. And if you continue reading Revelation 9, you will find out it says that once the river of the Euphrates dries up, there will be a 200,000, which is 200 million soldiers crossing the Euphrates River to start this great slaughter where a third part of man is going to die. So this is crazy stuff. And you know what? Right now, I can only, in my opinion, I can only say that China alone, by themselves, can have this number, 200 million soldiers, okay? Let's hope that we're not going to go there. But folks, China sounds pretty serious. And then, don't forget, China also have their allies, which is the Russians, North Korea, okay, and then this new so-called ISIL group that has taken over there in the Middle East. So I don't know, things are getting crazy, but you know, my advice is do not fear. You know, God says these things will happen, and that it dried up so much that the snakes, folks, are coming out of the water there. Okay, so this is crazy stuff. But once again, you know, do not fear. God has not given us the power of fear, but the power of, you know, a solid mind. And to use that solid mind of yours means, you know, to do the right thing, which is, again, be good, be kind, look after yourself, respect other people, and to make you know, a small adjustment to your life. If you do choose to worship, you know, the God that I serve, do a 360 turn in your life, get baptized, and you know, even if this war goes the way it does say here in the Revelation 9, you know, to slay a third part of man. Folks, even if there is a war, and I'm telling you guys, you know, if they blow up New Zealand or whatever, I have no fear. I know where I'm going, you know. We must not fear death. But right now, it seems like people are waking up too late to what China's been doing, while the rest of the world has been fighting another war, and it is a war against this pandemic, okay, and also a war against those who refuse still to be vaccinated. So now the real threat is actually coming into place, and you know, like I say, the morale for the soldiers are low. I told you guys here in New Zealand, the morale for our soldiers are low because the government has basically now split up our soldiers between those who are vaccinated and those who are not vaccinated. That the ones who are vaccinated are bullying those who are not vaccinated and telling them they are not good enough to be Kiwis, and they're not good enough to defend New Zealand. So the morale, folks, is very, very low. And I can tell you, it's not just in New Zealand, it is across the globe. But China right now is standing very strong. And that is a big problem, folks. Their morale is high, and they know what's going on. And I think they are going to take advantage of this, you know, Luciferian pandemic. And it's not good. It's not good. It's really not good. But wow, just crazy stuff. Everything's happening so fast. Okay, so I'm going to put up another 2 video clips just to give you an idea of the China military and also the Russian military, because these are the 2 we should be watching out for, China and Russia, okay, and what kind of capabilities they have if Russia, if Russia does join the fight. I'm not even going to worry about North Korea. I know that North Korea also does have quite a big military, but the main focus is on these 2 muscles, these 2 muscle guys, China and Russia. All right, enjoy the rest of the video, and I hope you guys are still having a good week. And I'll sign off here by saying, again, be good, be kind, look after yourself, and respect others, okay? That is the way to go. Keep your angelical energy that is inside you charged and positive, and have no fear, because once again, the Lord that I serve makes a clear promise that He will look after His people, and He will also look after people that are, trying to be good humans. All right, see you guys. Bye-bye.
If China and the United States were to go to war, who would have the advantage? In this military comparison, we're pitting China's People's Liberation Army against the United States military to see how they match up. After we lay out the capabilities of each, we'll decide who will win in an all-out war. Bear in mind that both of these militaries are always changing, so it's important to keep an eye on the future. In the end, it'll all come down to which country has the stronger and smarter military. Let's see if you come to the same conclusion we do of who would win in a war between China and the United States of America. In terms of resources, China and the US are both well equipped to support their militaries during the war. It's well known that the United States spends more money than any other country on its military. The most recent military budget for the United States was around $721 billion. That's more than many countries' entire GDP. On the other hand, China's military budget is around $178 billion. Notice the huge contrast between the two nations' military spending. Just in pure spending, the United States beats China. But just because a country spends a lot of money does not mean they have the better military equipment or personnel. Although the United States invests more money in their military, China leads with a different resource: manpower. If all-out war happened, the ability to manufacture weapons and replenish casualties would be vital. The current population of the United States is just over 330 million people. The population of China, around 1.5 billion people. Of course, not everyone in each population would be able to fight or work in factories, but just in terms of people, China vastly outnumbers the US. This brings us to the active number of military personnel in each country. Who has the bigger military? Well, it should come as no surprise that the number of soldiers in China's military is much larger than the United States. With more people in the country, there are more people in the military. In fact, the number of military personnel in China is almost double the amount of military personnel in the United States. The US military consists of around 1.3 million personnel on active duty. The People's Liberation Army has just over 2 million military personnel. If war broke out between the two countries, the United States would need to immediately reinstate the draft, just to come close to matching the number of military personnel the People's Liberation Army currently has. Due to the immense size of the Pacific Ocean, a war between China and the US would most likely not start on land. So let's first look at the Air Force capabilities of each nation and how they stack up against one another. The total number of military aircraft the United States has is around 5,370. China's Air Force contains about 3,010 planes, but these numbers are always fluctuating as new planes are built and old aircraft are retired. Right now, the Chinese military is building and purchasing aircraft much faster than the US. It's estimated that in a few years the number of aircraft between the two nations will be comparable. But what about the types of aircraft? Which country has better fighter planes, bombers, and transports? The United States has a vast array of aircraft at their disposal, the most impressive of which are the F-35 Lightning, F-22 Raptor, and F-15 Eagle. These fighter jets help the US maintain air superiority. However, China has its own stealth fighter in the J-20, although it's only available in extremely low numbers and is generally considered a poor man's version of the American F-35. In the air, the American military still retains a lethal advantage over the Chinese military with more sophisticated avionics, a much larger fleet of fifth-generation aircraft, and a far greater number of support aircraft such as tankers and AWACS platforms. American pilots also train on average 20 to 30 hours more per year than their Chinese counterparts, and in more realistic scenarios than the Chinese. As we look at other aspects of the Air Force in each country, we find that larger aircraft such as bombers and transports are not equal. The United States has a clear advantage. There are two reasons for this. The first is because the US just has more aircraft. The second reason is because a lot of money being pumped into the United States military goes to research and development each year. The United States aircrafts are up to date, while the Chinese Air Force is still working with functional but older models. You don't need to look much further than the United States' Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, Northrop B-2 Spirit, and Rockwell B-1 Lancer to show that in terms of dominating ground targets from the air, the US has the advantage. Other than the skies, the next most important military technology in a war between China and the US would be the Navy. Controlling the oceans in this conflict would be vital for success. One of the most important ships in a naval arsenal would be the aircraft carrier. The floating fortresses would be crucial to launching airstrikes on the opposing country. Currently, the United States is the world leader in aircraft carriers. The US has 11 active aircraft carriers, while China only has 2, and only one of those is currently rated as combat ready. This clearly puts dominance of the ocean in favor of the United States military. But what about other warships? If China could destroy the US aircraft carriers, would they have the advantage? The United States currently has around 430 naval ships on active and reserve duty. However, only about 300 of those ships are currently able to deploy at a moment's notice. If war broke out between China and the United States right now, China would have a fleet of 335 ships to call upon. But just like the case for the US, not every ship would be available for combat, with about 20% on each side being currently undergoing maintenance, retrofit, or rest and relaxation for its crews. Without eliminating the US's aircraft carrier fleet, China would stand no chance of victory in the Pacific if all-out conflict took place. Yet even with American carriers out of action, China would be extremely hard-pressed to deal with the American submarine fleet. While it has its own fleet of 74 subs versus the US's 66, China severely lacks in anti-submarine warfare assets and would be ill-equipped to take on America's silent service. On the American side, a disastrous performance by its own anti-submarine warfare assets during exercises in the early 2000s revealed a terrible crumbling of the American Navy's capability to wage anti-submarine warfare after the end of the Cold War. Since then, and with the help of ultra-silent diesel submarines from partner nations, the US has undertaken great steps to once again bolster its ASW capabilities and is believed to be well prepared to face any enemy fleet as the world prepares for great power competitions once again. For now, the US fleet remains supreme, but it's divided between responsibilities around the world, while China can focus the entirety of its efforts in fighting America's Pacific Fleet alone. With a rapidly modernizing fleet and more sophisticated shipbuilding efforts, China looks set to close the gap between itself and the US in the approaching decades. What would happen if the war made its way to land, though? Obviously, it would depend on where the war was being fought. The nation battling on their home turf would ultimately have the advantage because of their ability to replenish land forces more easily. Let's take location out of the equation and just compare the land-based military capabilities of each nation. We know that in terms of soldiers, China outnumbers the US. We also know that if soldier numbers need to be replenished, there are many more people to choose from in China than in the US. Basically, if the two countries went to war using only soldiers, the United States would eventually succumb to the large number of available manpower China has. That being said, this is not how wars are fought anymore. Instead, land battles can be won using machinery such as tanks. The United States has a tank arsenal of around 8,010 vehicles. The US's main battle tank is the legendary M1 Abrams, of which not a single one has been lost to enemy action yet. If deployed, the United States tank army would be a devastating force. It would plow through anything in its path. China has fewer tanks at around 6,560, and just under half of those are first-generation tanks dating back to the early Cold War era. Around 2,360 of the Chinese tanks are Type 59s. These tanks were produced in the 50s and 60s. They're antiquated and currently retired, but still kept in reserve. This means that the tank force of China is actually much smaller than the United States'. The US pours billions of dollars into upgrading their tanks with state-of-the-art equipment and keeping their forces modernized. Clearly, the United States would decimate China in a tank battle. In today's day and age, battles are rarely fought only on the ground. At some point, they may not even be fought on the planet. Recently, the United States has implemented a new branch of the military, Space Force. Space Force's missions is to organize, train, and equip Space Forces in order to protect U.S. and allied interests in space and to provide space capabilities to the Joint Force. It is clear that the United States is moving toward militarizing this new horizon. But is China? Recent reports have shown that China has been rapidly expanding its space program. They were the third country to launch a human into space behind the former Soviet Union, now Russia, and the United States. China completed this feat back in 2003 and has since ramped up their space program. They are the first and only country to put a rover on the far side of the moon, where they've made several discoveries. China has also been launching more and more satellites and military spacecraft into space in recent years. It's estimated that China has more than 320 satellites. 105 of them are military in nature. The United States has around 123 military satellites, even though the US has been in space much longer than China. It would seem that the breakthroughs at the China National Space Administration have greatly sped up the military satellite capabilities of the country. The budget for NASA in the United States has been cut year after year, almost immediately after they put the first man on the moon. China's space program, on the other hand, seems to be getting an influx of money each year from the government. How long until the research and development of China's engineers and space scientists surpass the US? In space, the country with the best technology and most knowledge of the environment will be victorious in battle. If the United States continues to fall behind in space exploration, they will not stand a chance in the space war with China. This brings us to our last comparison between the two countries, a comparison that has no winner. Instead, everyone loses. We're talking about nuclear weapons. As of right now, China has an estimated total of 320 nuclear warheads. That might seem like a lot, but it is nothing compared to the amount of nuclear weapons the United States has stockpiled. The United States has about 6,370 nuclear warheads under its control. 2,000 of those nukes are awaiting to be dismantled and disposed of. However, if nuclear war broke out between China and the US, neither country would get a chance to use all their nuclear weapons. The human race would be annihilated long before then. So, it's probably in China's and the United States' and the entire world's best interest that nuclear war never comes. Although the United States has a slight military advantage over China, we can't underestimate how far China's military has come in a relatively short amount of time. Also, the vast amount of manpower could be enough to allow China to hold out for a long time, slowly depleting the United States' resources. However, the reason we believe that the United States would win a war with China is because of experience. The United States has a lot more military experience than China. This means that the leaders of the military have seen combat and know what works and what doesn't. The US has been at war almost perpetually in one form or another since World War II, most recently in the Middle East. Since the beginning of Desert Storm in 1991, the United States has maintained a military presence in the Middle East. In fact, the United States has been fighting in Afghanistan for almost 18 years. This means military personnel and leaders have constantly been gaining skills and experience in the art of war. China, on the other hand, has not fought in a war in over 40 years. The last war they fought in was in 1979 when China invaded Vietnam. Vietnam had just come out of its own civil war and had gained much experience during that time. The small country was able to humiliate the Chinese military, forcing them out of their country after only 3 weeks. It seems that experience can outweigh sheer numbers during wartime. It is for this reason that we believe the United States would win a war with China if it were fought today. However, and some of you might have already seen this coming, if China continues to expand and upgrade their military as they have been doing in recent years, it will not be long before their military strength surpasses the United States. If this happens, it's a very real possibility that China would win a war against the United States in the future. Their drive to update their machinery and technology can be seen in their space program. and the expansion of their military. Within the next decade, we at the Infographics Show may need to make a new video to reevaluate this military comparison between China and the United States, with the winner being the People's Liberation Army of China. November 2nd, 2021, the world is reeling from the economic devastation brought about by the coronavirus pandemic. And for world powers, some might see it as an opportunity to make a move. Believing the United States is too distracted by China and the lingering effects of the coronavirus, Russia makes its move in Eastern Europe, seeking at last to reunify its military conclave of Kaliningrad with the motherland. It'll also cut off the renegade Soviet provinces of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia from NATO and force them back into the loving arms of Mother Russia. NATO immediately responds, but quick reaction forces stationed along Eastern Europe are no match for the overwhelming might of the Russian army. It'll take weeks for NATO to organize a proper military response, but the United States has already begun to strike back. Not in Eastern Europe, but in the Pacific. A U.S. naval task force, part of the U.S. Pacific Command, is on its way to attack the headquarters of the Russian Pacific Fleet in Vladivostok. Russia's Far East has always been problematic for the Russian military to defend. The incredible size of Russia makes reinforcing the Far East extremely difficult and impossible to accomplish in a timely manner. Then again, the U.S. stands to gain little by attacking Russia's Far East, except for knocking the Russians out of the Pacific for good. A push into Russia from the east is impossible. The distance to any military objectives worth seizing in the west entirely too far, and transportation networks easily sabotaged by the Russians. Russia, however, is not ready to give up its presence in the Pacific, and luckily for it, the Russian Pacific Fleet is its second most powerful fleet. Suffering from years of neglect, though, that's not saying much. Steaming out of their home port to meet the first American carrier strike group en route to their shores is a fleet consisting of 6 destroyers and a half-dozen corvettes, led by the cruiser Varyag, flagship of the Russian Pacific Fleet. The Russians know they're outmatched in open water, so instead they opt to use the same tried-and-true tactics of the 1904 Russo-Japanese War. They'll be fighting the same way they fought the superior Japanese Navy, and the same way the Soviet Union expected to fight the American Navy, utilizing the doctrine of a fortress fleet. Supported by shore-based installations and aircraft, the Russian Pacific Fleet never strays more than a few dozen miles from shore. But the first strike against the Americans will come from below the waves. The Russian submarine fleet has suffered from similar levels of neglect as the surface fleet. However, with only one active carrier in the Russian Navy, great emphasis has been put into maintaining available Russian submarines. Gone are the glory days of the Soviet Navy, when hundreds of Soviet subs prowled the world's oceans, forcing the Americans into a game of underwater cat and mouse. Russian military command does not believe their Kilo-class submarines, dating back to the waning days of the Cold War, are survivable against the American fleet. Therefore, Kilos are ordered to remain silent, close to the shore, dashing in for attacks of opportunity once the enemy fleet is fully engaged. The 3 improved Kilo-class subs have a greater chance of approaching the American strike group, but only the Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky is combat-ready. The attack will fall on the small fleet of Oscar IIs capable of launching long-range attacks with anti-ship missiles. Had the attack come just 10 years earlier, the Russians would have likely found great success using their subs against the Americans. After developing the greatest anti-submarine warfare capabilities on the planet during the Cold War, the United States allowed its ASW capabilities to seriously atrophy, resulting in a series of embarrassing mission kills on American carriers during training exercises with friendly nation subs in the early 2000s. However, the Americans were quick to correct their mistake, even contracting a Swedish submarine for 2 years to help them restore their ASW capabilities. The American 2021 fleet is not the 2001 fleet that couldn't see a submarine in a swimming pool. The 4 Russian subs must close to within 350 nautical miles to launch their Granite anti-ship missiles. They don't dare close in for torpedo strikes against the American carrier, knowing they'll be easily spotted well before then. In order to reduce the chance of detection, the subs approach the carrier strike group on a 30-degree offset from each other, which has the benefit of greatly increasing the search radius of the strike group's ASW assets. The Americans know that their first strike will likely come from beneath the waves, and they've been prepared. ASW helicopters fan out dozens of miles around the strike group, equipped with torpedoes and sonar that they periodically dip into the ocean to listen for the telltale acoustic signature of a Russian sub. American attack subs always held an advantage over their Soviet and Russian counterparts, and during the Cold War, US subs tailed Soviet subs without being detected, allowing them to record a vast acoustic library of all known Soviet and now Russian submarines. Further aiding the efforts in the hunt for the Russian subs are the P-8 Poseidons based out of Guam, Japan, and South Korea. With the world's largest air tanker fleet, the United States is able to drastically increase the range of its Poseidons, allowing the aircraft to sweep a corridor across the Pacific for the carrier strike group. The Poseidons laid down vast fields of airdrop sonobuoys. On contact with salt water, the sonobuoys batteries activate. Some of the buoys are set to active search mode, pinging the ocean for miles around them with powerful sonar and listening for the report. Others are set to passive, listening for the telltale sound of a Russian sub. But further aiding the hunt for Russian submarines is a brand new development by the US Navy, a radar that can penetrate the waves and detect the underwater wake of a submarine. The subs can't evade the vast fields of sonobuoys deployed by the Poseidons, and eventually each sub begins to generate a good track. Poseidons now drop down to just a few hundred feet above the waves, allowing their magnetic anomaly detector to verify the presence of Russian submarines below. Upon confirmation, each Poseidon drops 2 torpedoes. The torpedoes don't even need to score a direct hit. Even a miss of 100 feet generates so much pressure that the submarine's hull will rupture. Round 1 goes to the Americans. Submarines aren't the only way to kill a carrier though, and Russian Tu-22 bombers are already airborne. During the Cold War, Soviet military planners knew that attacking a carrier strike group would be an extremely dicey proposition. Official battle plans called for attacks with a minimum of 100 bombers, with an estimated loss rate of 50%. Even then, a mission kill was likely but not an outright sinking, merely taking a carrier out of action for a few months to a year as it underwent repairs. Today, the Russian Air Forces only have 67 Tu-22s, and most of them are stationed in the much more important Western Theater. What they do have is the Granite anti-ship missile, capable of being launched from standoff ranges that should hopefully keep the bombers safely out of the strike group's air defenses. 24 Tu-22s leave the Russian coast behind. The American carrier is moving at full power, making it a surprisingly fast and evasive target. Russian satellites fixed the carrier group's location for the bombers, but only for 15 minutes before they dip past the Earth's horizon and lose radar contact. The best way to fix the carrier long-term would be to use airborne radar assets, but with American air bases in Japan hosting fleets of fighter aircraft, the AWACS planes would be splashed in a matter of hours. The greatest difficulty Russian forces are having in taking the American carrier out is simply finding the damn thing. Satellite surveillance gives the Tu-22s a box a few hundred square miles wide where the carrier could potentially be hiding. Now the bombers must approach that target box and remain within range of their Granite missiles, 388 miles, until a new satellite fix can help the bombers get better targeting data. The bombers could turn on their own radars, but that would make them stand out like a spotlight in a dark room, making them easy prey for the carrier's combat air patrol. While the Russians are having difficulty fixing the carrier's location, the Americans are not having similar problems. Even under intense cyber attack, the American recon satellite network is vast, outnumbered only by the Chinese in physical assets but not in capabilities. AWACS planes launched from Japan each have a detection range of just over 250 miles, and once more supported by aerial refueling tankers, the US Air Forces are able to cover a wide swath of Russia's Pacific coast with radar coverage. Further supplementing the land-based AWACS planes are carrier-launched Hawkeye airborne radar planes and EA-18 Growlers. The Russian attack wave is easily vectored, and the carrier's combat air patrol is dispatched. While the Tu-22s must get within 388 miles to launch their attack, the carrier's F-18 Hornets and the new F-35Cs each have a combat radius of over 1,200 miles. Guided by airborne radar, the F-35s take point. The Tu-22s realize they've been targeted when the F-35's fire control radar illuminates them, but by then it's too late. Countermeasures spoof a quarter of the incoming missiles, but 10 of the bombers are still down. The limited missile capacity of the F-35s is its greatest weakness, able to carry only 4 missiles internally in order to preserve its stealth capabilities. Instead, the F-35s are forced to switch to guns, and for the first time in decades, US fighters strafe enemy aircraft with guns. Cannon capacity is also very limited on F-35s, however, and the Russian planes are built tough. 3 more Tu-22s are splashed, leaving 9. They're still hundreds of miles from launch, though, and the follow-on F-18s may not be stealthy, but with Russia unable to provide effective air cover past its shores, they don't need to be. The bombers are sitting ducks, speeding straight into a head-on deathmatch with the approaching Hornets. Wisely, the surviving 9 Tu-22s turn around and head back for home. Round 2, once more, goes to the US. As the surviving Tu-22s arrive home, however, the crews are sent for chow and a few hours sleep. As they rest, the bombers are being refitted with a brand new weapon, just delivered from the Western theater. The Russian military still has very small numbers of them and must use them extremely judiciously. But with the strike group now within 1,500 miles of the shore, the time is now. Half a day later, the Tu-22s are once more back in the air. They know they'll be immediately spotted by the American satellites and AWACS planes once they leave the Russian coast. But this time, they don't need to get so close to deliver their deadly payload. The Americans can't believe it. The Russians must be crazy. They're trying the exact same attack that just failed so catastrophically. Vectored in by Hawkeyes and Air Force AWACS, the Combat Air Patrol once more moves to intercept the incoming threat, well outside of anti-ship range. This time, the Tu-22s only need to get within 1,000 miles of the carrier. They have to once more rely on targeting data from the overhead satellites, meaning the American carrier can only be fixed for brief moments in time. The carrier isn't close enough to the shore for installations to aid in tracking. They must once more target a very large box of the Pacific Ocean, but this new Russian weapon is fully capable of finding its own targets. It's perfect for the task at hand, and long before the Americans' Combat Air Patrol can intercept him, each Tu-22 drops two 10-meter black and silver missiles from their wingtip pylons. The Zircon anti-ship missiles immediately fire their rocket engines, boosting them to over 2 times the speed of sound. The rocket engine now detaches from the missile and falls to the ocean below, as the missile's scramjet fires into action. The missile scramjet engine has no moving parts. Instead, it compresses incoming supersonic air and simply adds fuel, which causes the superheated air to explode. The energy redirected behind the missile by the engine nozzle. It's a brilliant design, but only works when you're already at supersonic speed, which has limited its use by militaries for decades. The missiles rise to the edge of the stratosphere where the air-breathing engines can still supply needed oxygen, but high enough that the missile's onboard targeting suite can pinpoint the American carrier. A stealthy body helps the missiles evade the American Aegis radar sweeping the sky. As a satellite enters proper phase over Earth, it sends a new fix on the carrier to the missiles, redirecting their course and greatly increasing their accuracy. A few dozen miles from their targets, the strike group's Aegis radars begin to pinpoint the incoming missiles. Traveling at Mach 9, though, the strike group's missile defenses have less than 30 seconds to respond. The strike group's missile defense systems are fully automated. Humans are no longer fast enough to respond to deadly hypersonic threats. Only a machine is up to the task, and Americans have built themselves one hell of a missile defense machine. Beams of powerful electromagnetic energy reach up toward the missiles in an attempt to directly interfere with the sensitive electronics of the targeting suite or confuse them. 3 missiles suddenly careen wildly off course, tearing themselves apart thanks to their hypersonic speed. 15 missiles remain, 20 seconds to impact. The destroyer escorts prepare to launch decoys. They first deploy chaff as a means to make the missiles think a better target is somewhere else through its superheated metal flakes. However, it soon becomes apparent that these missiles are much more advanced than the Americans thought when they don't even begin to alter course. Quickly altering course themselves, the destroyers deploy their more advanced Nulka rounds that are more powerful and try to walk the missiles away from the formation. 15 seconds to impact. The Russian missiles are finally within interceptor range of the strike group's destroyers, and within moments salvos of interceptors are fired. However, the Russian missiles are moving at such incredible speeds that a superheated layer of plasma around them is making radar lock difficult to maintain. It takes 3 seconds for each volley of interceptors to be fired, and by the time the second volley is fired, the Russian missiles are too close to be intercepted by American rams. Another 4 Russian missiles are splashed, 11 missiles remain. 5 seconds to impact. Each missile is now moving at almost 7,000 miles per hour on their descent phase. The layer of superheated plasma around each missile grows in size as the missiles plunge down and the atmosphere thickens. The last line of defense for the strike group comes online and will have mere seconds to respond. On ships across the strike group, Sea-Whiz cannons have already been placed on standby. The plasma surrounding the descending missiles once more makes radar lock difficult to achieve. The missiles move so unbelievably fast that by the time they've entered Sea-Whiz range and the Sea-Whiz systems have swiveled the cannons in the right direction, there's only 2 seconds left to fire. Most of the cannons never fire. There simply isn't enough time for the onboard radar to work out a good lock through the layer of plasma around each missile. A few do, but their accuracy is abysmal. Only a single Russian missile is knocked out a mile above the carrier. 10 missiles have penetrated the carrier's defenses. 2 of the missiles have suffered manufacturing defects and never detonate as they strike the carrier. The Zircon hypersonic anti-ship missile is, after all, bleeding-edge tech for the Russians. Bugs in the software and defects in the manufacturing are inevitable. The missiles are moving so fast, however, that sheer kinetic energy alone punches a hole through the decks of the carrier, each missile penetrating almost to the bottom hole. The electronic brain in one of the other missiles has slightly misjudged its geometry and explodes in the ocean a few hundred feet away from the carrier. The other 7, however, find their mark. The hypersonic missiles move so fast that they penetrate several decks before the onboard explosives are triggered, which only increases the destructing potential of each missile. Armed with 800 pounds of explosives, the Zircon carries only half the explosive power of a Granite anti-ship missile. But with 7 direct hits, it doesn't matter much. Explosions rip through the inner decks of the carrier, buckling the flight deck and destroying dozens of aircraft in the below-deck hangar. Secondary fuel explosions rock the ship as black smoke belches out. Hundreds of sailors have died in seconds. Hundreds more will die soon. The carrier is dead in the water, but she doesn't sink. The incredible size and engineering of a supercarrier makes it almost impossible to sink with anything less than a massed missile attack. That's why the Soviets planned on using 100 bombers to do the task. Russia's new Zircon hypersonic missiles are deadly to the US Navy, but they are still available in such low numbers that unless Russia dedicated the majority of its stockpile to a single attack, sinking a US carrier is still incredibly unlikely. Achieving a mission kill, however, is very likely, and though the carrier won't sink, it'll be out of combat for at least a year as it undergoes repairs. Modern Russia would be very hard-pressed to sink a US carrier. Finding and hitting a carrier out at sea is incredibly difficult, especially when it's on the move. Without a recon fleet of air assets the size and scope of the US's own fleet, and the ability to dominate the skies far from its own shores, Russia's first problem is just finding American carriers in the first place. Of course, in the real world, Russia is moving to develop land-based variants of the Zircon anti-ship missile because it recognizes that in a realistic scenario, its Tu-22 bombers would be unlikely to survive long enough to actually get in range of a carrier out at sea, thanks to the US fighter bases in South Korea and Japan.